When 14-year-old Marcus Johnson quietly entered Elite Airways Open Doors event, notebook clutched tightly against his chest, no one noticed the meticulous aviation diagrams hidden inside. Captain Richard Turner's public humiliation of the black teen would spiral into a company-wide scandal within hours. Neither could imagine how their confrontation would transform an entire industry, nor that the pilot's career wasn't the only thing hanging in the balance. The truth behind Marcus's last name would change everything. The morning sun glinted off the polished metal of the Elite Airways hangar. Large banners announcing Open Doors Day fluttered in the gentle breeze as families and aviation enthusiasts streamed through the entrance. Among them was 14-year-old Marcus Johnson, clutching a worn notebook filled with carefully written aviation notes and diagrams. Unlike the other teenagers who moved in noisy groups, taking selfies and barely paying attention, Marcus walked alone. His eyes widened at the sight of the regional jets parked inside the massive hangar. For months, he had saved every dollar from his weekend lawn mowing job to pay for the bus fare across town to attend this event. "Everyone gather around," a tall man in a crisp pilot's uniform called out. "I'm Captain Richard Turner. I've been flying with Elite Airways for 23 years, and I'll be your guide today." Captain Turner, with his silver-streaked hair and confident stance, commanded immediate respect. Parents nudged their children forward while Marcus found a spot near the front, opening his notebook to a fresh page. "This is our Embraer E-175, Turner explained, gesturing to the sleek aircraft behind him. "It's the backbone of our regional fleet." As the tour progressed, Turner described the aircraft's features with practiced ease. Most visitors nodded politely, but Marcus absorbed every word, occasionally jotting notes. When Turner mentioned the plane's cruising speed, Marcus's hand shot up. "Yes?" Turner acknowledged him with slight surprise. "Sir, I read that the E-175 has a maximum cruising speed of 543 miles per hour. Is that right?" Marcus asked, his voice quiet but clear. Turner raised an eyebrow. "That's correct. Someone's done their homework." The tour continued to the cockpit. While other teenagers snapped photos without much interest, Marcus studied the instrument panel with fascination. When Turner explained the basic function of the flight control systems, Marcus asked thoughtful questions about the elevators and rudder controls. A few parents began paying more attention to Marcus than to the guide. One mother whispered to her husband, "That boy knows more than the rest of us combined." Turner noticed the shift in attention. His explanations became more technical, perhaps testing the limits of the boy's knowledge. Yet Marcus followed along, nodding and occasionally making notes. "How does someone your age know so much about aviation?" an impressed father asked Marcus during a brief pause. Marcus smiled shyly. "I just love planes, sir. I read everything I can find about them." Turner's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly as he called the group's attention back to himself. "Let's move on to the maintenance area," he announced, his voice slightly louder than necessary. Marcus closed his notebook and followed, unaware that his simple enthusiasm had already set unexpected events in motion. The tour continued into the maintenance section where Captain Turner gestured toward a partially disassembled jet engine. "This is the Pratt & Whitney PW1700G engine," Turner explained confidently. "It generates around 15,000 pounds of thrust at takeoff." Marcus frowned slightly, looking at his notes. After a moment of hesitation, he raised his hand again. "Actually, sir," Marcus said politely, "I think the PW1700G series on the E-175 produces about 24,000 pounds of thrust. The 15,000 figure might be for the older CF-34 engines." The maintenance bay fell silent. Turner's smile vanished, his face hardening as he stared at Marcus. "How would a kid like you know that?" Turner asked, his voice dripping with condescension. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. "I read the specifications in Flight International magazine, sir." Several visitors turned to look at Marcus with new interest. A woman nodded approvingly, and someone else murmured, "Smart kid." Turner's neck reddened as he noticed the crowd's attention shifting away from him. He cleared his throat loudly. "Well, it seems we have an expert in our midst," Turner said with a forced laugh that didn't reach his eyes. though sometimes a little knowledge can be dangerous without proper training and experience. The tour group continued walking, but now several people were asking Marcus questions directly, bypassing Turner. The captain's irritation grew with each passing minute. Finally, Turner stepped directly in front of Marcus. "Tell me, young man, what does your father do? Does he clean these planes, perhaps?" The question landed like a slap. Several people gasped softly. A teenage girl toward the back of the group slowly raised her phone, recording the uncomfortable scene. Marcus stood tall despite the flush creeping up his cheeks. "My father works in aviation, sir," he answered simply, maintaining eye contact. "I see," Turner replied with obvious skepticism. "And I suppose he taught you everything you know." The silence that followed was painful. Parents exchanged uncomfortable glances. A young man in the back whispered to his girlfriend, and she nodded, also raising her phone to record discreetly. A maintenance worker who had been replacing a panel nearby paused his work, watching the scene with a frown. Marcus swallowed hard. "I learned most of it on my own, sir. From books and websites." Turner's tight smile never softened. "Well, isn't that ambitious? Shall we continue with the tour, unless our young expert has more corrections to make?" The sarcasm in his voice was unmistakable. As the group reluctantly moved forward, Marcus stayed at the back, his earlier excitement replaced by a burning sense of humiliation. The tour group had reached the flight simulator area when Turner's patience finally snapped. Marcus had remained quiet since the engine discussion, but the damage was done. Several visitors were now walking beside the teenager, asking him questions about aviation instead of paying attention to the official guide. "Since our young visitor seems to have so much to share," Turner announced loudly, cutting off a conversation between Marcus and an interested parent, "perhaps we should examine his credentials." Before Marcus could react, Turner stepped forward and plucked the notebook from the boy's hands. The group fell silent as the captain began flipping through the pages with exaggerated movements. My, Turner said, his voice dripping with mockery. "Look at these little drawings. Basic flight principles copied from textbooks. How cute." Marcus reached for his notebook, but Turner turned away, continuing to page through it in front of the group. "This is what happens when we let just anyone into these events," Turner said with a dismissive shake of his head. "They think reading a few articles makes them experts." A female employee wearing an Elite Airways customer service uniform stood nearby, watching with visible discomfort. She took a half-step forward but then stopped, conflict evident on her face. "Please, give it back," Marcus said quietly, his voice steady despite the humiliation. Turner held the notebook up higher as if displaying evidence. "Flying takes years of training and discipline. It's not for everyone." He looked directly at Marcus. "Dreaming is free, kid, but aviation isn't for everybody. Some people are just meant to stay on the ground." With that, Turner dropped the notebook. It hit the floor, pages splaying open, a few loose sheets scattering across the polished concrete. Marcus knelt to gather his work, his hands trembling slightly. Though he fought to hide it, the hurt in his eyes was unmistakable. Several phones were recording now, their owners no longer bothering to be discreet. "Let's continue," Turner said briskly, as if nothing unusual had happened. "The flight planning office is through this door." Most of the group followed reluctantly, casting uncomfortable glances back at Marcus. A few stayed behind, awkwardly watching as the boy collected his papers. At the far end of the hangar, a well-dressed black man who had been observing the tour stepped out from behind a display panel. His eyes narrowed as he watched the scene unfold. His posture straightened, decision made, as he began walking purposefully toward Marcus. The female employee finally moved forward to help, but stopped when she noticed the approaching man. Recognition flickered in her eyes, followed quickly by relief. Marcus, still gathering his scattered notes, didn't notice either of them coming his way. The well-dressed man reached Marcus just as the boy was collecting the last few pages from the floor. He knelt down beside him, picking up a detailed drawing of a cockpit layout. "That's impressive work," the man said kindly, handing the page to Marcus. "Thank you, sir," Marcus replied softly, not making eye contact. The man helped gather the remaining papers, then stood up, offering his hand to help Marcus rise. As they both straightened, Captain Turner noticed the interaction and quickly walked back from the group. "Excuse me," Turner said, his voice firm with authority. "This is a guided tour, sir. If you're here for the Open Doors event, I'd appreciate you staying with the group." The man smiled politely, straightening his tailored suit jacket. "I was just helping this young man pick up his notes." Turner stepped closer, clearly trying to establish dominance. "This event is for serious aviation enthusiasts. We can't have people wandering off or disrupting the schedule." "I see," the man replied calmly. He turned to Marcus. "Are you okay?" Marcus nodded, clutching his notebook tightly against his chest. Turner crossed his arms. "If you don't mind, sir, we need to continue. Unless you have official business here?" "Actually, I do," the man said, reaching into his jacket pocket. He pulled out an Elite Airways employee badge and held it up. "Michael Johnson, new Vice President of Operations. Today's my first official visit to this hangar." The color drained from Turner's face. Several onlookers who had stayed behind exchanged glances, and one woman covered her mouth to hide a smile. "Mr. Johnson," Turner stammered, "I wasn't informed that you would be— welcome to Elite Airways, sir. If I had known—" "That I'd be here today," Michael finished for him, "or that I'd be watching how you conduct tours." "I was just maintaining orders, sir," Turner explained quickly. "Sometimes visitors can disrupt—" "I saw everything, Captain Turner," Michael interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "And I'm curious why you felt it necessary to humiliate a young aviation enthusiast at an event specifically designed to inspire interest in our industry." Turner's eyes darted between Michael and Marcus, making the connection but not quite sure of its significance. His mouth opened and closed without finding the right words. Michael turned to the remaining tour group members. "Please, continue enjoying your visit. I believe Captain Turner was about to show you the flight planning office." Turner hesitated, then nodded stiffly. "Yes, right this way, everyone." As the group moved on, Michael remained with Marcus. The female employee approached them, looking relieved. "Mr. Johnson," she said, "I'm Laura from customer service. I'm so sorry about what happened." Michael nodded. "Thank you for your concern, Laura. Everything's going to be fine now." By Monday morning, videos of the Open Doors incident had spread throughout Elite Airways employee chat groups. In the company cafeteria, small clusters of workers watched the clips on their phones, heads shaking in disapproval. "Did you see what Turner did to that kid?" a flight attendant asked her colleagues. "Classic Turner," replied a maintenance technician. "He's always looked down on everyone." At precisely 10 a.m., Captain Richard Turner received a message to report immediately to Human Resources. His stomach tightened as he made his way to the administrative wing. He had hoped the weekend would blow over without incident. But the stern face of Diane Morris, head of HR, told him otherwise as he entered her office. "Take a seat, Captain Turner," Diane said, gesturing to the chair across from her desk. Next to her sat Thomas Reed, the chief pilot. "I assume this is about Saturday's tour," Turner said, straightening his uniform tie. "A simple misunderstanding, really." Diane placed her tablet on the desk, a screen facing Turner. "We've received multiple videos from visitors. Would you like to watch them?" "That won't be necessary," Turner replied, forcing a confident smile. "The boy was disrupting my tour, contradicting me in front of guests. I simply needed to maintain control of the situation." "By throwing his notebook on the floor?" Thomas asked, his disapproval evident. Turner shifted in his seat. "Perhaps I was a bit firm, but these events have protocols. We can't have just anyone thinking they know better than our trained personnel." "Just anyone?" Diane repeated slowly, making notes on her tablet. "You mean a 14-year-old aviation enthusiast who was asking questions? An intrusive teenager who was undermining my authority?" Turner countered. "How was I supposed to know he was anyone important?" Diane and Thomas exchanged glances. "Important?" Diane asked. "So your behavior would have been acceptable if he wasn't important?" Turner realized his mistake too late. "That's not what I meant. The teenager you humiliated," Diane said carefully, "is Marcus Johnson, son of our new Vice President of Operations, Michael Johnson." The blood drained from Turner's face. "How was I supposed to know that?" he asked weakly. "He looked like just some ordinary kid." "Just some ordinary kid," Thomas repeated, shaking his head. "And if he were just some ordinary kid, your behavior would have been appropriate." Turner stared at the floor. "No, but what exactly, Captain Turner?" Diane interrupted. "Because from where I sit, you publicly humiliated a child because he knew something you didn't expect him to know." "What happens now?" Turner asked quietly. "We're conducting a full investigation," Thomas explained. "Until then, you're grounded from flight duties. You'll be on administrative duties only." Turner nodded stiffly, the reality of his situation finally sinking in. His 23-year career at Elite Airways now hung in the balance because of a 15-minute interaction with a teenager he had assumed didn't matter. By the end of the week, Captain Turner had become the main topic of hushed conversations throughout Elite Airways. As he walked through the operations center to his temporary desk assignment, conversations would stop abruptly, only to resume in whispers after he passed. In the pilot's lounge, Turner approached his usual table where 4 other captains were having coffee. When he pulled out a chair, 2 of them suddenly remembered meetings they needed to attend. The remaining pilots gave short answers to his questions before finding reasons to leave. "What's going on?" Turner asked Jim Parker, a pilot who had trained with him years ago. Jim looked uncomfortable. "People are talking, Rich. They're calling you the racist pilot in the videos." "That's ridiculous," Turner protested. "This has nothing to do with race. The kid was being disrespectful." "He was asking questions at an open doors event," Jim replied, standing up. "And everyone saw how you treated him differently from the white kids taking selfies and not paying attention." Later that day, Turner attended the mandatory weekly flight safety meeting. As he entered the conference room, several chairs away from him suddenly became saved, with jackets and bags. He found a seat in the back corner, feeling the weight of eyes on him. After the meeting, 3 black pilots who had worked with Turner for years approached him. Turner had always considered them cordial colleagues, if not friends. "We need to talk," said Marcus Williams, a senior captain with 27 years of experience. "About what?" Turner asked defensively. "About how you treated that boy," Marcus said. "We've worked together for 15 years, and I always gave you the benefit of the doubt when others complained about how you treated them differently." "I treat everyone the same," Turner insisted. "No, you don't," said Lisa Chen, another captain. "You've just never had to face consequences before." "You only showed your true character when you thought there wouldn't be any consequences," added Darius Reynolds, the 3rd pilot. "That's what bothers us the most." Turner looked between them, suddenly aware of the gap that had always existed, but that he had never acknowledged. "I've never been racist," Turner said firmly. "Never." "Then why did you ask if his father cleaned planes?" Marcus Williams asked quietly. Turner had no answer. The 3 pilots shook their heads and walked away, leaving Turner standing alone. As he drove home that evening, Turner felt something unfamiliar. Not just fear for his job, but doubt about himself. The workplace that had always been his domain, where he'd felt respected and comfortable, had transformed overnight into a place where he was an outsider. For the first time, he wondered if he had been wrong. The Johnson family dinner table was unusually quiet. Only the soft clink of silverware against plates broke the silence as Michael, his wife Lisa, and their son Marcus ate without their usual cheerful conversation. Lisa, a pediatrician who had just returned from a long hospital shift, finally put down her fork. "Marcus, honey, are you doing okay? You've barely touched your food." Marcus pushed his mashed potatoes around his plate. "I'm fine, Mom." "You don't seem fine," Lisa said gently. Michael set down his glass of water. "Your mother and I are worried about you, son." Marcus sighed. 2 kids at school called me the boy from the video today. Jasmine showed me that the clip has over 50,000 views now." He looked up at his parents. "I just wanted to learn about planes. Now I'm some kind of internet example." Lisa reached over and squeezed his hand. "You did nothing wrong." "Your mother's right," Michael added. "You were respectful and knowledgeable. Captain Turner was the one who behaved inappropriately." Marcus looked at his father. "Why didn't you tell him I was your son? Right there in the hangar?" Michael considered the question carefully. Sometimes the best lesson is to let people reveal who they truly are. If I had immediately said, "This is my son," Captain Turner would have changed his behavior instantly, but that wouldn't have shown his real character. But it would have stopped him from humiliating Marcus, Lisa said, her voice tight with controlled anger. She turned to Michael. He's just a boy trying to learn. That man had no right to treat him that way, regardless of whose son he is. I agree, Michael said, but this way, everyone saw his true colors. I don't want him to lose his job because of me, Marcus said quietly. Both parents turned to look at their son. Honey, his behavior is why he might face consequences, not you, Lisa explained. But people will say it's because Dad is a VP now, Marcus insisted. They'll say he only got in trouble because of who I am. Michael shook his head. What matters is that no child should be treated that way. If Captain Turner had done that to any young person, it would still be wrong. Your father's right, Lisa said, her doctor's composure returning. This isn't about punishment. It's about making sure this doesn't happen to another child. Marcus nodded slowly. I still want to be a pilot someday. This doesn't change that. Michael smiled for the first time that evening. That's my boy. Don't let anyone take your dreams away. And next time, Lisa added with fierce determination, I'll be attending these events with you. I'd like to see anyone try to embarrass my son with me standing there. The tension broke as Marcus finally smiled. Mom, you'd probably make them cry. You better believe it, Lisa said, and the family shared their first genuine laugh in days. Laura Martinez, the Elite Airways customer service representative who had witnessed the incident, couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. After 3 sleepless nights, she made a decision. She forwarded the video to her college friend Alicia, now a reporter for the local news station. People need to see this, Laura wrote in her message. This keeps happening, and nobody does anything. 2 days later, the evening news featured a segment titled, Elite Airways Pilot Humiliates Black Teen During Education Event. The story included edited clips from the video, interviews with anonymous airline employees, and background information on both Captain Turner and the Johnson family, though Marcus's face was blurred to protect his privacy. Elite Airways' PR department went into crisis mode. By the following morning, the company issued a statement. Elite Airways has temporarily removed Captain Turner from active flight duty while we conduct a thorough investigation into the incident. We are committed to creating an inclusive environment for all aviation enthusiasts and take these allegations very seriously. At Westview High School, Marcus walked through the hallways with his head down, trying to avoid attention. It didn't work. Hey, it's the plane kid, called out a senior as Marcus passed by. Some students laughed while others looked at him with sympathy. During lunch, Marcus sat alone until his friend Devin joined him. You're famous now, Devin said, sliding his tray onto the table. Not in a good way, Marcus replied. Are you kidding? You stood up to that jerk, Devin insisted. Jamal and his cousins think you're a hero for not backing down. Across the cafeteria, a group of older students pointed and whispered. One made an airplane motion with his hand, causing his friends to laugh. Some hero, Marcus muttered. Meanwhile, in the Elite Airways executive offices, Michael Johnson was called to an emergency meeting with CEO Patricia Winters and the company's legal counsel. This is becoming a PR nightmare, Winters said, gesturing to the news reports playing on a screen. Social media is calling for Turner's termination, but his lawyer is already threatening a wrongful dismissal suit. The video speaks for itself, Michael responded calmly. Yes, but we need this resolved quietly and quickly, the CEO insisted. Can you speak with your son about not giving interviews? We need to control the narrative. Michael's expression hardened. My son is the victim here. He hasn't spoken to any press. Of course, Winters backpedaled. But this company is now your responsibility too, Michael. We need to protect Elite's reputation while we handle this internally. As Michael left the meeting, his phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. CNN just called our home. How did they get our number? He sighed deeply. What had begun as a simple Saturday visit to an aviation event was now spiraling beyond anyone's control. The private humiliation of his son had become a public referendum on race, privilege, and corporate accountability. And somewhere across town, Captain Turner was watching his life's work collapse around him, one viral share at a time. The Elite Airways Ethics Committee gathered in a glass-walled conference room on the top floor. 5 senior employees from different departments sat around a large table covered with personnel files and printed emails. A photo of Captain Richard Turner was displayed on the wall screen. "Let's review what we've found," said Terrence Washington, the committee chair and head of legal compliance. Human Resources pulled Captain Turner's file going back 15 years. Diane from HR opened a folder. "Initially, we found nothing major. Good performance reviews, excellent safety record, a few minor infractions about uniform code and scheduling disputes. But then we dug deeper," added Ramona Diaz from Finance. "We searched internal communication records and found 3 separate incidents where employees of color reported uncomfortable interactions with Turner." She displayed the first report on the screen. 3 years ago, Jamal Wilson, a black mechanic, reported that Turner questioned his work repeatedly and often rechecked maintenance he performed, but not work done by white mechanics. "What happened with the complaint?" Washington asked. "It was marked resolved through informal discussion. No further action taken," Diane replied. "Then, last year," Ramona continued, "Sophia Chen from Dispatch filed a complaint stating Turner consistently spoke over her in briefings and once said her English pronunciation made it hard to understand critical information, despite Sophia being born and raised in Seattle." "Resolution?" Washington asked. "Turner received a verbal warning. No further action," Diane said, shaking her head. Alex Petrov from Operations pulled out another document. "Most concerning is this statement from Darnell Johnson, a former intern who left the company last summer. We contacted him after seeing the viral video. He says Turner repeatedly suggested he serve coffee during meetings and asked if he was sure he wanted to be a pilot instead of ground crew." The room fell silent as they contemplated the pattern emerging. "Why weren't these connected before?" Washington finally asked. "Each incident was handled separately by different managers," Diane explained. "No one looked for patterns. Some complaints weren't formally documented because employees feared retaliation. We also interviewed his current colleagues," Ramona added. 3 pilots of color described subtle differential treatment, being interrupted more often, having their decisions questioned, or being excluded from social gatherings." Washington nodded grimly. "So the incident with Marcus Johnson wasn't isolated?" "No," Alex confirmed. "It was just the first time it happened in public, on camera to someone connected to upper management." "And that's the problem, isn't it?" Washington said. "It took all those factors for anyone to take it seriously." The committee members exchanged uncomfortable glances, knowing their company had failed these employees long before Turner had humiliated a 14-year-old boy in the hangar. "Let's prepare our full report," Washington said finally. "This isn't just about one incident anymore. It's about systemic failures in how we handle these situations." 3 weeks after the incident, Captain Richard Turner requested a meeting with the Johnson family. His email to HR described it as an opportunity to clear up this unfortunate misunderstanding. The meeting was arranged in a neutral conference room at Elite Airways headquarters. Turner arrived first, dressed in his civilian clothes rather than his uniform. He sat stiffly at the table, rehearsing what he would say. When the door opened, Michael Johnson entered, followed by Marcus and Lisa. An HR representative named Shanice Williams joined them as mediator. "Thank you all for coming," Shanice began. "Captain Turner has requested this meeting to address the incident at the Open Doors event. Our goal is respectful communication." Turner cleared his throat. "I appreciate you all being here. I wanted to explain that there seems to have been a misinterpretation of my intentions that day." Lisa's eyebrows rose, but Michael placed a gentle hand on her arm. "I've been a pilot for over 20 years, Turner continued. "Sometimes I take my role as an authority figure seriously, perhaps too seriously. I regret that my actions were seen as disrespectful." "Seen as disrespectful?" Lisa repeated, her voice controlled but tight. Turner shifted in his seat. "I understand how it appeared, but I was simply trying to maintain the structure of the tour. If anyone was offended by my approach, I apologize." Silence filled the room. Everyone turned to Marcus, who had been studying Turner carefully. "You're not really sorry," Marcus said quietly. You're just sorry there was a video and that my dad works here. Turner blinked, surprised by the directness. Young man, If I was just some random kid, would you be sitting here now? Marcus asked. Would you care at all about how you made me feel? Turner looked to Shanice for help, but the HR representative merely nodded for him to respond. I would hope that I would reflect on my actions regardless, Turner said unconvincingly. No, you wouldn't, Marcus continued. You don't actually think you did anything wrong. You just want your normal life back. Michael finally spoke. My son is 14 years old, Captain Turner, and he's showing more maturity and self-awareness than you are. With all due respect, Mr. Johnson. No, Michael interrupted. There was no misunderstanding. You saw a young black boy who knew more than you expected, and you couldn't handle it. We all saw it. The company saw it. Now the whole city has seen it. Lisa leaned forward. You didn't come here to apologize. You came here hoping we'd help you save your job. Turner's face flushed. That's not true. I simply wanted to clear the air. Marcus shook his head. If you really want to apologize, you need to understand what you did wrong first. Shanice wrote something in her notebook as Turner struggled to find a response. I think we're done here, Michael said, standing up. Marcus, Lisa, let's go. As the Johnson family left, Turner remained seated, realizing his rehearsed half-apology had only made things worse. 1 month after the hangar incident, all Elite Airways employees received an email from Human Resources. The message appeared on every company computer, phone, and bulletin board throughout the facilities. Following a thorough investigation into the events of April 15th, the statement read, Elite Airways has taken appropriate disciplinary action regarding Captain Richard Turner's conduct during our Open Doors Day event. In the pilot's break room, a group gathered around the bulletin board, reading silently. Effective immediately, Captain Turner has been removed from his position as Senior Fleet Training Captain and reassigned as a standard line pilot. This change reflects our commitment to ensuring all representatives of our company demonstrate the values of respect, inclusivity, and professionalism. At his kitchen table, Turner read the same announcement on his laptop. His hands shook slightly as he scrolled to the next paragraph. Turner will complete our comprehensive diversity and inclusion training program before returning to active flight status. This 60-hour program will be completed on his own time and at his own expense. His wife, Susan, stood behind him, reading over his shoulder. What does this mean for us? She asked quietly. Turner pulled up his company portal to check his new schedule and salary. The numbers made him wince. They've cut my pay by almost 30%, he said, his voice hollow. And I've lost all my international routes. The phone rang. It was Jim Parker, a fellow pilot. Rich, did you see the announcement? Jim asked. Yes, Turner replied stiffly. Look, I'm scheduled to fly with you next week to Denver. I wanted to give you a heads up that several flight attendants have requested not to work with you. The scheduling department is scrambling. Turner closed his eyes. Great, just great. It's going to be rough for a while, Jim admitted. People are choosing sides. After hanging up, Turner logged into his email to find a message from his direct supervisor. Richard, in addition to the company announcement, I need to inform you that your office has been reassigned. Your new workspace is in Section C, Desk 14. Please clear out your current office by end of day tomorrow. Section C was a row of shared desks used by junior pilots and relief crew. The next morning, Turner carried a cardboard box through the operations center. Conversations stopped as he passed. When he reached his new desk, a small workstation with no privacy, he found a copy of the company's value statement taped to the monitor. Our values include respect for all individuals. No exceptions. Someone had highlighted the word all with a yellow marker. As Turner set down his box, his phone buzzed with a message from the scheduling department. 3 pilots had refused to fly as his co-pilot for the upcoming rotation. The message was clear. He still had a job, but his 23 years of status and respect within the company had vanished overnight. 5 weeks after the incident, Richard Turner's life had become unrecognizable. The isolation went far beyond his demotion and pay cut. In the employee cafeteria, Turner set his tray down at a table where 3 other pilots were eating lunch. Within 30 seconds, all 3 stood up, made brief excuses, and moved to different tables. He ate alone, feeling dozens of eyes watching him. His phone, once constantly buzzing with invitations and messages from colleagues, had gone silent. The pilot's weekly poker game, which he had attended for over a decade, continued without him. No one even bothered to tell him he was no longer welcome. Walking to his car after his shift, Turner overheard 2 flight attendants talking. "Did you see Turner today? Still acting like nothing happened. I requested never to be on his flights. I don't want to work with someone who treats people that way." Turner pretended not to hear, quickening his pace to his car. That weekend, he went to the West Side Aviation Club, a private group of aviation enthusiasts where he had been a member for 15 years. He hoped to find some normalcy there, away from elite airways. As he approached the reception desk, the club manager intercepted him. "Richard, I need to speak with you privately," the manager said, leading him to a small office. Once inside, the manager handed Turner an envelope. "The board had an emergency meeting yesterday. They've decided to terminate your membership, effective immediately." "What? Why?" Turner asked, though he already knew the answer. "Several members threatened to leave if you remained. They have children in the youth aviation program and, well, they've all seen the video." Turner drove home in silence, the envelope unopened on the passenger seat. At home, his wife Susan was sitting at the kitchen table scrolling through her phone with a troubled expression. "My book club just uninvited me," she said without looking up. "Apparently Janet's daughter goes to school with that Johnson boy. They don't feel comfortable having me there anymore." Turner hung up his jacket. "It's not your fault. You weren't even there." "No, but I'm married to the man who humiliated a child in public," Susan replied sharply. "What kind of person does that, Richard? I've been asking myself that question for weeks now." "I didn't know he was the VP's son," Turner said weakly. Susan finally looked up at him, her expression a mix of anger and disappointment. "Would it have made a difference if he wasn't? Would you have treated some other black child with respect if his father wasn't an executive?" Turner had no answer. "My sister won't return my calls," Susan continued. "Our neighbors cross the street to avoid talking to me. Even Pastor Williams asked if we might take a break from the church hospitality committee." Turner slumped into a chair, the full weight of his actions finally beginning to sink in. It wasn't just his job or his reputation. His entire social world, and worse, his wife's, was collapsing around him. "What have I done?" he whispered, more to himself than to Susan. 6 months after the hangar incident, Richard Turner was driving his 16-year-old son, Alex, home from baseball practice. The teenager had been unusually quiet lately, but Turner had been too wrapped up in his own problems to notice. "How was school today?" Turner asked, trying to make conversation. Alex stared out the window. "Fine. Just fine. Coach Matthews said you missed practice yesterday." Alex shrugged. "Didn't feel like going." Turner glanced at his son. "That's not like you. What's going on?" After a long silence, Alex turned to face his father. "Do you know what they call me at school now? Racist Junior." Turner felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. "What?" "Yesterday, I was sitting in the cafeteria, and some guys from the basketball team walked by. One of them said, 'Hey, isn't that the racist pilot's kid?' Then another guy said maybe I shouldn't sit at their table because I might have caught something from you." Turner pulled the car over to the side of the road, his hands shaking on the steering wheel. "Why didn't you tell me this was happening?" he asked. "What would you do about it?" Alex shot back. "Make another scene? Humiliate someone else?" The words stung like a slap. "Alex, my history teacher showed that video in class," Alex continued, his voice breaking, "as an example of modern prejudice. She didn't know I was your son until everyone started looking at me." Turner reached for his son's shoulder, but Alex pulled away. "You always taught me to stand up for myself," Alex said, "to be proud of who I am. But how am I supposed to be proud when my own father is the bad guy in a viral video?" For the first time, Turner saw the situation not through his own eyes. The unfair treatment, the overreaction, the damage to his career, but through the eyes of his son, an innocent teenager suffering for something he had done. "I'm so sorry, Alex," Turner whispered. "It's not just me," Alex continued. "Mom cries when she thinks I can't hear. Grandma keeps calling, asking what's wrong with you. Everyone's acting like you died or something." Turner stared ahead at the road, seeing his life with sudden, painful clarity. "I've been telling myself that everyone else was wrong," he admitted. "That boy, his father, my co-workers, the company, I blamed them all for overreacting. And now," Alex asked, "now I see it wasn't them. It was me. I was wrong." The words felt foreign in his mouth, but also strangely freeing. "So what are you going to do about it?" Alex asked, a challenge in his voice. Turner turned to face his son, seeing in him a maturity that he himself had been lacking. "I'm going to start by being honest with myself," he said. "The problem isn't that boy Marcus, or his father, or the video. The problem is me, and I need to fix that." For the first time in months, Alex looked directly at his father without shame or anger, just a cautious hope. 7 months after the incident, Richard Turner sat in a modest office across from Dr. Elaine Winters, a therapist specializing in workplace conflicts and bias awareness. "I've spent my whole life being Captain Turner," he explained during their 3rd session. "I never questioned how I saw the world or treated people." "What changed?" Dr. Winters asked. "My son being bullied because of me," Turner admitted. "Seeing him hurt made me finally understand what I did to that boy." "To Marcus?" Dr. Winters nodded. "Tell me about your own childhood." Turner described growing up in a small town in rural Pennsylvania, where his father and uncles had worked as mechanics for a regional airline. "My dad used to say certain jobs were for certain people," Turner explained. "He'd point out the pilots, all white men back then, and say that's where I belonged, not with the ground crew or cleaners who were mostly people of color. And you internalize those messages," Dr. Winters observed. "I never thought of myself as prejudiced," Turner insisted. "But when that boy corrected me in front of everyone, something just snapped. I couldn't accept that he might know something I didn't." After the session, Turner sat in his car for nearly an hour. Then he pulled out a notepad and began to write. He crossed out lines, rewrote sentences, and started over multiple times. Finally, satisfied, he copied the final version onto proper stationery when he got home. The next day, he mailed the letter to the Johnson family. 3 days later, Lisa Johnson held the unopened envelope in her kitchen, reading the return address with a frown. "It's from Turner," she told Michael. "Should we just throw it away?" Michael studied his wife's expression. "What do you think?" "I think he doesn't deserve Marcus's forgiveness," Lisa said firmly. Marcus walked into the kitchen and noticed the tension. "What's that?" "A letter from Captain Turner," Michael explained. Marcus considered this for a moment. "Can I read it?" Lisa hesitated. "Honey, you don't need to subject yourself to more of his—" "I want to read it," Marcus said quietly but firmly. Lisa handed him the envelope. Marcus opened it carefully and unfolded the single page. "Dear Marcus," he read aloud, "I am writing to apologize for my inexcusable behavior during the Open Doors event. There is no justification for how I treated you. I was the adult in that situation, and you were a young person eager to learn. Instead of encouraging your interest in aviation, I tried to humiliate you because of my own insecurities and prejudices." Marcus continued reading in silence, his expression thoughtful. "I don't expect forgiveness," the letter concluded, "but I want you to know that your dignity and maturity that day have forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about myself. You deserved better, and I am truly sorry. Respectfully, Richard Turner." Marcus carefully refolded the letter and handed it to his parents. "Do you think he means it?" Lisa asked skeptically after reading it. "I don't know," Marcus replied honestly, "but it's the first time he's actually admitted he was wrong." 8 months after the incident, Elite Airways unveiled a new initiative. Colorful banners hung in the main terminal announcing the Future Flyers Mentorship Program. The company had converted an unused space near their training center into a classroom equipped with flight simulators, aviation textbooks, and interactive displays. Today marks a new chapter for Elite Airways, CEO Patricia Winters announced to the gathered press and employees. Our Future Flyers program will provide education and mentorship to young people interested in aviation careers, with special outreach to communities that have been underrepresented in our industry. Behind the small stage, Michael Johnson watched with quiet satisfaction. After the viral incident, he had proposed this program to the board as a way to create something positive from a negative situation. It had taken months of planning and a significant budget allocation. But the company had finally embraced the idea. That weekend, 20 teenagers from local high schools arrived for the program's first session. Marcus Johnson was among them, now 15 and still passionate about aviation despite his experience. Michael had invited him to be part of the inaugural class, though he made sure Marcus understood he would receive no special treatment. "Welcome, future aviators," greeted Captain Williams, one of the 5 pilots who had volunteered as mentors. "Over the next 6 months, you'll learn about aerodynamics, navigation, safety protocols, and much more." As the students introduced themselves, their excitement was palpable. A 14-year-old girl named Sophia mentioned that she had never considered aviation as a career until she saw the news story about Marcus. "If he could stand up to that pilot, maybe I could be one too," she explained. Marcus blushed but sat up straighter. From the doorway of an adjacent office, Richard Turner watched the scene unfold. He hadn't been invited to participate. In fact, he hadn't even been informed about the program until it was announced publicly. Now, on his break between flights, he observed the energy and enthusiasm of the young participants with a mixture of regret and reflection. Among the students were 9 black teenagers, 4 Hispanic youths, and 3 Asian students, alongside 4 white students. Turner couldn't help but notice how different the room looked from his own training class 25 years ago, which had been almost entirely white and male. "They look pretty engaged," said a voice beside him. Turner turned to find Jim Parker watching alongside him. "They do," Turner agreed quietly. "You know," Jim said thoughtfully, "in all the years we've been flying, how many kids like them have we inspired? And how many have we discouraged without even realizing it?" Turner didn't answer, but the question settled heavily on his shoulders as he watched Marcus patiently explaining something from his notebook to a younger boy who seemed to be struggling with a concept. "I have to get back to my flight," Turner finally said, turning away from the scene. But as he walked down the corridor, the sounds of excited young voices asking questions about aviation, the very questions he had once ridiculed, followed him, echoing with possibilities that he had never before considered. 9 months after the incident, Richard Turner sat nervously outside the Human Resources office. It was time for his semi-annual evaluation, the first since his demotion. Through the glass walls, he could see Diane from HR and Thomas Reed, the chief pilot, waiting for him with serious expressions. "Captain Turner," Diane greeted him formally when he entered, though he was no longer a captain in anything but title. "Please have a seat." Thomas opened a folder. "Let's get straight to the point. Your technical performance remains excellent. Your flight records show perfect adherence to procedures, and your landings have been textbook." Turner nodded, waiting for what would come next. "However," Diane continued, "your teamwork evaluation is concerning. 3 co-pilots have requested transfers off your rotation. 2 flight attendants filed formal complaints about your communication style, and your participation in required crew meetings has been minimal." "I understand," Turner said quietly. Thomas leaned forward. "Richard, I'll be blunt. You're on thin ice. If these patterns continue, we may have to consider termination, despite your technical abilities and long service." Turner took a deep breath. "I know I've been difficult to work with. I've been angry about the demotion, the pay cut, everything." "That's understandable," Diane acknowledged, "but not acceptable for continued employment." "I've been seeing a therapist," Turner admitted, the words difficult to say aloud. "Working through some things. It's helping me understand myself better." Thomas and Diane exchanged glances, surprised by this revelation. "That's good to hear," Thomas said cautiously. Turner straightened in his chair. "I have a request. I've heard about the Future Flyers mentorship program." "What about it?" Diane asked, her expression guarded. "I'd like to contribute," Turner said. "Not as a mentor. I understand I'm not ready for that. but maybe I could help develop some of the technical materials. Flight planning guides, simplified systems explanations, things I'm good at." The room fell silent. "Why?" Thomas finally asked. Turner considered his answer carefully. "For most of my career, I saw my knowledge as something that made me special, better than others. I used it to exclude people who I didn't think belonged." He paused. "I want to use that same knowledge to help people now, especially those I might have pushed away before. You understand this would be unpaid, volunteer work," Diane clarified, "and behind the scenes." "I do," Turner nodded. "I'm not looking for credit or publicity." Thomas frowned. "This is a difficult decision. The program was created partly in response to your actions. Having you involved could be seen as inappropriate. Or, Diane suggested, it could be seen as part of a genuine rehabilitation process." "I know I can't undo what I did," Turner said, "but maybe I can help build something good from it." As Turner left the office, he knew his request had created a dilemma for the company. It was the first time in months he had asked for something beyond mere survival, a chance to contribute positively rather than simply avoid further punishment. Whether they would give him that chance remained to be seen. 2 weeks after his evaluation, Turner received an email from Thomas Reed with the subject line, "Future Flyers Program, Decision." His hand hovered nervously over his mouse before he clicked to open it. "After careful consideration," the email read, "we have decided to allow you to contribute to the Future Flyers program in a limited capacity. You may develop written educational materials and flight planning guides, but will not have direct contact with students at this time. All materials must be reviewed by the program committee before use." Turner felt a weight lift from his shoulders. Not completely, but enough to breathe a little easier. The next day, he received a box of curriculum outlines and aviation education standards. In his small apartment, Turner cleared the dining table and spread out the materials. He spent his evenings and weekends creating simplified explanations of complex aviation concepts, designing diagrams that teenagers could understand, and developing practice problems that were challenging but not discouraging. He found himself thinking constantly about Marcus and other young people like him, eager to learn but facing barriers. For each explanation he wrote, Turner asked himself, "Would this have helped me understand when I was 15? Would it welcome someone who didn't grow up around planes?" At work, Turner's colleagues began to notice subtle changes. He stopped eating alone, occasionally joining tables with newer pilots who hadn't been around during the incident. He listened more than he spoke, asked questions instead of making pronouncements, and even admitted when he wasn't sure about something, behavior that would have been unthinkable from the old Captain Turner. After 3 weeks, Turner submitted his first batch of materials. Days later, he received a message from the program coordinator. "These are excellent, clear, accessible, and engaging. Please continue." Meanwhile, at the Johnson household, Michael was reviewing program materials when Lisa looked over his shoulder. "These are really good," she remarked. "Who created them?" Michael hesitated. "Richard Turner." Lisa's expression hardened. "You're letting him participate in the program?" "Not directly with students," Michael explained. "Just creating materials. The committee thought it might be part of a rehabilitation process." "Do you believe he's changed?" Lisa asked skeptically. "I don't know," Michael admitted. "People don't change easily." Later that evening, Marcus found his father in the study, still reviewing materials. "Are those for future flyers?" Marcus asked. "Yes," Michael replied, then added reluctantly, "Turner created them." To Michael's surprise, Marcus nodded thoughtfully. "You know, Dad, if he's really trying to change, maybe he should have the chance to prove it." "After what he did to you?" Michael asked, bewildered. Marcus sat down beside his father. "That's exactly why. If this program is about second chances and breaking down barriers, doesn't that have to include people who want to do better?" Michael stared at his son, once again struck by his wisdom beyond his years. "When did you get so grown up?" he asked softly. Marcus smiled. "Probably around the time I had to stand up to a pilot in front of everyone." 11 months after the incident, Richard Turner stayed late at the hangar, reviewing maintenance logs for his flight the next morning. The large space was quiet. most employees having gone home hours ago. The only sounds were the occasional echo of his footsteps and the hum of overhead lights. Turner had developed this habit of working late partly to avoid the uncomfortable silences that still followed him in crowded spaces, and partly because the peaceful emptiness of the hangar after hours reminded him of why he had fallen in love with aviation in the first place. He was checking a hydraulic system report when he heard voices approaching. Young, excited voices echoing through the hangar. Turner froze, unsure whether to make his presence known or slip away unnoticed. Before he could decide, the hangar doors opened and a group of teenagers in Future Flyers program jackets walked in, led by Captain Williams. Turner recognized several faces from the group he had watched from afar over the past months, and there, in the middle of the group, was Marcus Johnson. "This is where most of our maintenance happens," Captain Williams was explaining. "Each aircraft undergoes thorough safety checks before—" He stopped abruptly when he spotted Turner. The entire group fell silent. Some of the teens looked confused by the sudden tension, while others recognized Turner from the infamous video and whispered to their neighbors. Marcus stood completely still, his eyes locked with Turner's across the hangar floor. The moment stretched uncomfortably until Turner finally stepped forward. "Hello, Marcus," he said simply, his voice quiet in the large space. "I'm glad to see you didn't give up on aviation." The tension in the room was palpable. Captain Williams moved protectively closer to the students, clearly uncertain about the situation. Marcus straightened his shoulders and took a deliberate step forward. "I don't let people like you define my dreams," he said, his voice steady and clear. Turner nodded slowly. That's good." He hesitated, then added, "Your materials for the course on weather patterns were very helpful. I recognized some of the diagrams from your notebook." Marcus's expression revealed brief surprise. "You're the one who's been creating the study guides?" "Some of them," Turner admitted. "It seemed like a way to make something useful out of everything that happened." An awkward silence followed until Captain Williams cleared his throat. "We should continue our tour. We still have the simulation room to visit." As the group prepared to move on, Turner stepped aside to give them a clear path. Most of the students avoided eye contact as they passed, but Marcus paused briefly. "The explanation of wind shear could use more detail," he said, his voice neither friendly nor hostile, just matter-of-fact. "Especially for beginners." Turner blinked in surprise, then nodded. "I'll work on that." Marcus rejoined his group without looking back. As they walked away, Turner heard one of the younger students ask Marcus, "Who was that guy?" "Someone who made a mistake," Marcus replied, his voice fading as they exited the hangar. "And maybe someone who's trying to fix it." Turner stood alone in the hangar, the encounter replaying in his mind, the first time he had faced Marcus directly since that day almost a year ago. The Elite Airways Conference Center was transformed for the evening. Rows of chairs faced a small stage decorated with blue and silver balloons. A banner reading, "Future Flyers, First Graduating Class," hung above the podium. Family members and Elite Airways staff filled the seats, chatting excitedly as they waited for the ceremony to begin. In the front row, Lisa and Michael Johnson sat with perfect posture, pride evident in their faces. Behind them, pilots, flight attendants, and mechanics who had volunteered as mentors watched with their own sense of accomplishment. At the back of the room, standing quietly near the exit, Richard Turner observed the scene. He wore civilian clothes rather than his uniform and had arrived just as the lights dimmed, avoiding unnecessary attention. CEO Patricia Winters took the stage to enthusiastic applause. "Welcome to this historic evening," she began. 6 months ago, we launched Future Flyers with 20 hopeful students. Today, all 20 are completing the program, many already applying for college aviation programs or entry-level positions with airlines. She went on to describe the program's success: improved grades among participants, 5 scholarships awarded, and 2 students already accepted to prestigious aeronautical universities. Due to this success, Winters announced, the board has approved expanding Future Flyers to 3 additional cities next year, tripling the number of students we can reach. The audience burst into applause. Michael squeezed Lisa's hand, their shared vision becoming larger than they had imagined. One by one, students were called to receive their certificates. When Marcus's name was announced, the applause was particularly enthusiastic. Several pilots who had been mentoring him stood as he crossed the stage, his walk confident and his smile bright. As Marcus accepted his certificate, he spotted Turner at the back of the room. Their eyes met briefly before Marcus turned his attention back to the ceremony. After the formal presentations, a reporter from the local newspaper approached Marcus. "You were the spark that started this program," the reporter said. "How does that feel?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "It's ironic," he finally replied. "This program exists because someone tried to stop me from learning. Now it's helping dozens of kids like me pursue aviation." "Has the experience changed how you see your future?" the reporter asked. "It taught me that obstacles aren't always what they seem," Marcus answered. "Sometimes they're opportunities in disguise." From across the room, Turner heard the interview. He watched as other students approached Marcus for advice, treating him like a leader despite his young age. As families began to depart, Turner slipped out unnoticed. But before leaving, he placed an envelope on the table with the program materials. Inside was a new set of advanced study guides he had created, along with a note, "For those who want to go further. No limits." The next morning, the local newspaper ran a front-page story. "Future Flyers Program expands after successful first year." Next to it was a photo of Marcus Johnson, described as the inspiration behind Elite Airways' groundbreaking diversity initiative. 1 year to the day after the hangar incident, Elite Airways hosted an aviation career fair in the same building where it all began. The company had transformed in that year, becoming a case study in how organizations could respond to incidents of discrimination. Richard Turner remained in his demoted position as a line pilot. His salary never returned to its previous level, and the premium international routes remained out of his reach. Yet he had found a kind of peace in his new role. His colleagues no longer avoided him entirely, though their relationship would never be what it once was. The permanent mark on his reputation was the consequence he had come to accept. In a corner of the hangar, a special section was dedicated to the Future Flyers program, which now operated in 4 cities across the country. 15-year-old Marcus Johnson, wearing a blue Junior Mentor badge, was helping a group of elementary school children build simple balsa wood gliders. "The weight has to be balanced," he explained patiently to a young girl struggling with her model. "Just like in life, balance is everything." Michael Johnson watched his son from nearby, talking with the program directors about next year's expansion plans. An airline magazine had recently featured Elite Airways in an article titled "Transforming Crisis into Opportunity," with Michael quoted extensively about turning a negative incident into positive institutional change. "Sometimes," Michael told a colleague, "prejudice shows us the worst sides of human nature, but it also gives us the chance to show our best. This program might never have existed if that incident hadn't forced us to look at ourselves honestly." Across the hangar, Turner was giving a technical demonstration on flight instruments to a group of high school students. It was his first approved interaction with students, carefully supervised and limited to his technical expertise. He spoke clearly and respectfully, answering questions without the condescension that had once been his trademark. At one point, Turner and Marcus passed each other in the hangar. There was no friendship between them. Too much had happened for that. But there was a mutual nod of recognition. Neither man stopped walking, but the acknowledgement itself represented a kind of progress that neither would have thought possible a year before. As the day ended, Marcus gathered his young students for a final word. "In aviation, like in life, what matters isn't who you are or where you come from," he told the children, looking up at him with wide eyes. "What matters is your dedication and your character. The sky doesn't care about your color or your background. It only cares if you've done the work to earn your place up there." A small girl raised her hand. "Can anyone be a pilot?" she asked. Marcus smiled, remembering the same question he had once asked himself. "Yes," he said confidently. "Anyone who is willing to work hard and never give up. The sky belongs to all of us."